Hello, everybody. Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to talk about innovation, behavior change, decision making, all of the some might call soft stuff, but are the really, really impactful stuff when it comes to innovation, change, major initiatives, technology transformations, you name it. So, my name is Taryn Kutches. I am part of the Regenerous Labs team, running alongside JoAnn Garbin and Dan Greenwald. JoAnn and Dan, you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm JoAnn Garbin. I am one of the instigators of Regenerous Labs, along with Taryn and Dan. And many of you are coming from the Microsoft Insiders community, so you're familiar with the book, The Insider's Guide to Innovation at Microsoft. And for those of you that have read it, this is a deeper dive with the creator of the framework that we introduce in pattern number 3, Innovating with Everyone.
Cool. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Greenwald. Let's see, I have two major roles. One is I'm the Chief Creative Officer of White Rhino. And my other role is similarly in Regenerous Labs, and I love them both. JoAnn and I have been working together for many, many, many years, and we found the bag of tricks, like we call it, the ninja dust of creating behavior change to work really well. My background is in psychology. Both my parents were PhD psychologists. My childhood was like one gigantic therapy session, but I didn't want to use it for that. That was not my career. I'm a creative person and I love communications, but I've been baking in psychology into my work for decades now. And we've now gotten to the point where we've got it so well honed that we've created a map of what every behavioral decision looks like. And when you think about it, a marketing problem is really a behavioral problem, or a communications problem is a behavior change problem. So that's what we're going to share with you today. And feel free to ask questions.
Awesome. Thank you both. For a little bit of context of Regenerous Labs, we are an innovation lab slash venture studio that, as JoAnn mentioned, was pioneered and started as a core culprit of the three of us and four others in this lab. And over the last really year and a half, we've been ideating, developing, and designing together products and solutions that really impact the world. And in addition to that, we've been curating thoughts, perspectives, ideas, and trying to build a community around the idea of regenerative innovation. And this series, this Innovating Out Loud series, is really the next step in that journey or complementing that journey. And JoAnn shared her book, which is really kind of the foundational principles in which we live and work every day around innovation. This series is all about maybe taking those principles, applying them to the real world, and talking about those, sharing examples. We have a phrase within the lab called say it ugly. So you'll hear us just kind of say it ugly, talk out loud, and our goal is to share, take the principles, demonstrate how you can use them, and then give you a tool in your toolkit that you can go and use in your everyday life. So this is the very first series. If you're here, thank you for joining us. We will be doing these monthly, and we'll share a little bit more about the next one towards the wrap of this session here. Well, with that, let's get into our topic today, which is all about decision-making, behavior change, and innovation. Before we unveil the method, maybe JoAnn and Dan, I'd love to hear your perspective of really why innovations stall. Where have you seen them break down? What is kind of the culprit, and what is a real culprit, and what versus what people think is the real culprit? Maybe JoAnn, you want to kick us off?
Yes, because there's a before and after in my career arc. There's life before Dan and team, and there's life after Dan and team. And I am very much, I've been an innovator and an entrepreneur my whole life since I was a kid, starting businesses. And I'm also a bull in a china shop a lot of times. I'm like, this is great, let's go, rah. Well, that works for some people, and it really doesn't work for other people. And at the end of the day, when I met Dan first in Boston, I was lead in Air Acuity out of Boston. Um, and I was looking for somebody to help us overcome a negative net promoter score and revenue stale. Like everything about the 15-year-old company had just kind of stopped. And so we were trying to break through. And I was meeting all these marketers and branders, and in walks Dan, and he's like, it's about people. It's about psychology and emotion. And he lays this out for me, and I was like, this is some serious ninja magic right here. And sure enough, like as we go through this session, we'll talk about the many different ways we've used it over the last 11 years now, and it really is like I bring this method and the people that created the method, because I'm not going to let them go, but I bring the method to the table on day zero of everything I do now. Because Dan, you mentioned marketers, it's persuasion and it's connection. Innovators, we sometimes think it's about solving the problem of the technology or the business, but it's really about persuasion and connection and creating safety and moving people along. And where most things die are when you put it out into the world and you get a whole bunch of different reactions.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think no matter what the innovation is, you can have anti-gravity if you've invented it. If you have not, taken somebody through the process of emotionally connecting with it and supporting it, you're gonna have resistance. I mean, people hate change. No matter how cool it looks, we are wired to resist change for all kinds of different reasons.
Mhm.
So making that emotional connection and then understanding how to take them through the when to use cognitive information, when to use more emotional information is really, really important. Or some of the best innovations in the world will just never happen. And I think we've all experienced that.
Yeah.
I gotta throw this out there. I've been doing a little digging into very unexpected things you didn't think were met with resistance when introduced. And I won't list all, like, the list is so long, but forks, medieval folks did not like forks. And Londoners did not like umbrellas.
Mm.
So it just goes to show you, like, even the simplest interjection of change can be met with real resistance.
hmm And I love how you talk about change. The word innovation, even sometimes too, people think it's the next, thing since sliced bread, but innovation is really just these small changes throughout the course of it. Innovation can happen in any role. It's really a change or a different way or a better way of doing something. And so when you think about it, it's like connecting with the people that are impacted by the decision or the idea is really the culprit of the pinpoint area of where a lot of these change initiatives, aka innovations, fail or break down. And if you just take a moment and kind of reflect and you think about, right, the last change you were either a part of or initiating or receiving, how much of it was about the idea itself versus how much of the conversations you had or were a part of with how people were going to react and how do we need to communicate this and what psychological barriers do we need to unpack?
Yeah.
Maybe this crew is really advanced, but normally the answer to that question is extremely weighted, heavy on the idea and the technology and the tool side of it, and kind of underweighted on the people side.
And
Yeah.
sometimes it can even
And
be sorry.
it pigeonholes you down into incrementalism, because you're right, it is about little changes that can happen everywhere, but even um not little changes in what the innovation is. Like you can have transformational innovation and it just needs a little reframing. That's the little
hmm
part. And
hmm
I love to point out the quote in the book from Julia Lucen, who leads the developer division at Microsoft. It's non-innovation until it's out in the world changing people's lives.
hmm
If you're not creating value for other people, it's just an invention or an idea. And so you have to deal with the people.
hmm
Go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry, I cut you
I
off.
was just going to say, sometimes I think for innovators, it can be very shocking to, be feel like you're presenting something that's earth-changing, earth-shattering,
Mm.
and only to be met with a lot of blank stares, and then worse than that, resistance.
Quality.
Uh, so it really helps to understand what might be driving that resistance, what are the obstacles, and then what are the push points from an emotional standpoint that can get somebody on board. And it really helps to do some homework up
Yeah.
front.
Awesome. So, Dan, you and the team at White Rhino recognized this, right, a while back and started seeing patterns, and over time developed really a framework in which you could follow a journey and kind of map the decision process in which every person goes through big decision, small decision, subconsciously, consciously, right, to a framework. So, Dan, tell us about how you guys came up with that framework, some of the background behind it, and then when you get ready to talk the details, I will share the framework on the screen so you all listening can see it too.
Sure. There are some pretty well-known psychologists. One of them famously is Prochaska, and he had created a model of change. And actually, interestingly, he based it on what it would take to quit smoking cigarettes. And that's, if you can get somebody to make that change, then you can make almost any other change. And he basically mapped the process to get there. What we found is when we started implementing these types of ideas in the real world, it didn't exactly map to the real world, but there were a lot of pieces that we could use. So we used our own real world experience and our own research, and we put together our version of this journey map that you're about to see, which tries to make it pretty simple and map the emotional and cognitive journey that people go on to make decisions. Now, this usually works best with the more complex the decision is, the better. For example, it's a lot different if you're buying a pack of gum than if you're buying an enterprise software solution, for example. But the other interesting thing about this process, which I'm about to show you, is that much of it is it's not even conscious to the person going through it. Um, they may be conscious about it to some extent, but you really have to point it out. So, and in the case of a pack of gum, it can happen in an eighth of a second. In the case of that longer purchase, it could be 18 months. And it's up to you. If you understand the process they need to go through, then that's all that matters. You can get them there.
Awesome. Here it is.
Okay. So yeah, so this is our fancy little sine wave here, and if you think about at the top left where it says unaware, that's imagine someone starting from not aware about this innovation, all the way to like yes, I've said yes, and I have a relationship, and I'm even going to evangelize for you. That's a long way to go, and you can't expect somebody to go in one fell swoop. And this is the way all humans make decisions. And it's now depending on a persona, whether you're a CFO or you're an innovator, the stops along this journey will be a little different, but they are still the same journey. So, well, if across the middle there's that dotted line which represents the difference between emotional and a cognitive state. Anything above that line is emotional territory. Anything below is cognitive territory. So in the very beginning, you will not even make it onto somebody's radar screen unless you are creating an emotional connection. That has to happen. It's got to be a positive emotional connection. And notice how it's higher than the rest of the graph. It's a little bit like a roller coaster. What goes up must come down. So this is the highest that someone will be if you do your job right. And this will push them through the entire journey because they want to believe this. And I we'll give an example of how this worked, but I just went through this process buying an electric car, and it was interesting. But very soon after if you've successfully made that emotional connection, you drop down the roller coaster below into cognitive territory, and now you're looking for a cognitive backup to support the decision that you really want to make. Like that you've made that emotional connection. I'm looking for data, but I need data because otherwise, if that data is not there, I'm going to be out. And the more I think about it, that moves then into this position of shared vision, where I can now picture myself, either buying this product or like endorsing this innovation or implementing it. And sometimes people need help to have that shared vision, and it's important to know that. Often they need help, and this is where the concept of tangibility really comes into play. If you make it past that point, you will get to the next level, which is your person has made a mental commitment. Like, I want to do this. I do want to do this. So you think you have it made at that point, but then this last hump here is actually a negative emotional hump, and it's the last minute fear that we all have. What are all the things that can go wrong? When I bought my electric car, I was thinking, what happens if electric cars like aren't a thing in 5 years from now, or what happens if I can't find a fast charger on my trip to Vermont or the Cape every year? All these things, and if you get them addressed, you notice that I'm addressing those with cognitive information, even though it's an emotional negative high. That's what works at that phase. And if you do that successfully, you will get to a yes. And we put the exclamation point there because it's often a very enthusiastic yes when it may not have started out that way.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Really quick, I just want to make a note. I should have started with this, but we are going to be taking Q&A at the end of this session. I think I briefly mentioned it, but there should be a chat feature here within Zoom. So throughout this presentation, if you have a question, please, please, please just drop them in the chat. We would absolutely love to hear from you, and we can follow up with them towards the end. So I just want to give that little bit of plug. And then, JoAnn, it looks like you are going to pipe in there.
I have a little color commentary, and it just occurred to me. Um, if you're a creator, an innovator, somebody that, is trying to move things into the world, I think our emotional humps are a bit higher than a normal human. And our fear moment is lower, right? So our wiring for whatever reason is like, yes, let's do this. And we have far fewer barriers along the way, which again, that's the bull in the china shop, right? It's like, why can't you see what I see? But
Mhm.
then it's not better or worse, it's just disposition, right?
Mhm.
Like I'm going to be slower about other things. Like you put me in a toothpaste aisle, I can't make a decision. I have no emotional connection to it. And I stand there like I have no idea. So just something that popped out to me. I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Our
I think
hump
it's I think
much
it's a good
bigger.
point. Yeah, I think the point is well taken because innovators I think get very very excited about the ideas, and you can picture it and you can see it disrupting the world, or whatever it is that you picture, and that is a tremendous emotional high.
Yeah.
And that is what carries you through the entire rest of the process. That level of optimism, and we all know it's never a straight line. There can be some painful moments in innovation.
Mhm.
Some. Many.
And I think the key is having that awareness that your emotional high is at a different level most of the time than the people around you who you need to make that innovation a reality, whether it's support, whether they're a dependent partner, whether they're a funding partner, whatever it may be. We also know innovation doesn't happen in silos. And so understanding your own, curve and how you're processing the idea, and then always comparing and contrasting it to somebody else. And so this is also somewhat linear with time, right? Usually like the first time you're introducing an idea or a concept or a solution to somebody, you're really aiming to get them as high up in that emotional high as you can, right? So if you correlate it to kind of the steps, it is somewhat linear, and this is what they're going to go through. And how do you restructure conversations, engagements, meetings, etc., to match where they might be feeling? And so, an example of that, meeting number one is you just want to wow them, right? You just connection number one, the opportunity you have, you want to get them as high up on that cliff. And then the second time you meet, or even in that session, they're probably going to swoop down. So how do you back that up with some more just data and information to kind of combat that cognitive thinking? But you can see how that would play out through a discussion. We have a pretty bigger example that we'll share as it relates to some of the work that we've all done together in the data center of the future. But Dan, you had mentioned the process you went through in purchasing a car, and I think that's a really fascinating one. Can you share that really quick before we jump into the data center example?
Yeah, I'll share it quickly. This is going back like years ago, maybe 8, 9 years ago, when electric cars were not nearly as the thing that they were. And I remember reading a magazine article, and I saw some pictures of, at the time Tesla had sort of rethought the electric car, and I thought, wow, I'm a very visual person. Now these things look really cool. I kind of like that. So I was starting up the emotional curve. And then one Father's Day, my kids convinced me to take a test drive of a Tesla, and so I reluctantly did it because it's a hassle to set all that up. And I will say that that test drive was like one of the most emotional moments of my entire life. Like here I am in this car that's 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, total silence. Everything is it backs into the space by itself. It drives itself. It just felt like, oh my God, this is, I'm a techno weenie too, and I was all in. So I walked away from that place, with an incredible sort of like buzz on, like a natural, like I got to get one of these. And so I get home, tell my wife all about this, and she starts peppering me with questions like, can we fit our 5 kids in this thing? Where do we get it charged? Do we have to? Is it going to cost us more money to charge it at home? Are we going to be able to make our trip to the Cape without stopping? What happens if we get stuck? Blah blah blah. All these things, and I didn't have the answers to this. And I was like, she's right. I was a little irritated, but I knew she was right. So I was
Mhm.
determined to get the answers, and I did find the answers, and we sort of came to that shared vision together, and we agreed, and then I went through that last minute hump after I sort of made the mental commitment of I want I really what happens if something goes wrong, and that's where I had all those feelings about what could possibly go wrong. Turns out some of them actually did go wrong. And by the way, I did not end up buying a Tesla, but that's a whole other story. But I didn't really realize I was going through the process, but looking back at it, I can see it very, very clearly.
That's
I
great.
wanna I wanna pull out one detail that we kind of skipped over in the curve, and we illustrate this in the book. Um, Underneath that curve are those trust levers, and this is the Judith Glacier work of how to build trust systematically throughout the unaware to relationship progression. And the reason I want to bring that up is what happened between you and your wife is you had the emotional high. She was still back at the beginning with
Mhm.
zero perspective, no trust established, didn't have the emotional high of driving the car. And so you walked into cognitive country, without any priming. And that's something that a lot of innovators and change makers face. They get brought into a company or they get hired into a new role or a new team. And if they don't take the time to build that trust, build that enthusiasm, if they head right into cognitive country, you're digging out of a hole. Like you can see it on the graph. Like you've got to dig back up to ground level. And it just you hear it all the time when they talk about CEOs, new CEOs coming into the company. They got to listen for 6 months. It's
Mhm.
like, yeah, like the story we're going to tell about the data center of the future was I was brought in from the outside world to help bring me and my hand talking. This is why I hold something when I'm on these things. Um, I was brought in into a very well established organization of experts that knew how to build data centers, and I was the new person. I spent 6 months, met with 200 people inside and outside, and partners and communities. That was all to help establish trust before we met them with something exciting, right? So, but that is
Well,
ninja
Critical.
magic I learned from this process.
I think that's a great segue, JoAnn. So just to kind of piggyback off of that, and I'll ad lib for you, and you can plug in. You just mentioned that everybody, within Microsoft was focused on how to build better data centers. And you came in, but actually the question, one of the many questions you were wrestling with, does anybody want one of these in your community? And that was slightly different, approach or question. And so you were in the exact scenario that Dan and his wife were in, but within a massive organization and a major, major decision behind it, that you were at the emotional high because you knew the answer to this question was actually no. And you were so excited about what the future could be and, the possibility to change the answer from no to yes with this question. But many of the leaders who were collaborating with were at the start of that curve, right? They weren't there yet. They were focusing on how to build a better data center. And so I think as we talk about this and we go into that example, that's a really great framing of where you found yourself. And then we can talk about the partnership of how the curve was used because, behind this is this question here. The number one problem was how do you convince, 12 senior leaders that changing the answer from no to yes is worth investing in. And I'll foreshadow just a minute here. It was really to treat all of them, right, as in unique individuals with 12 different approaches, knowing that each one of them had their own independent psychological curve and decision making behind it. So with that framing, Dan, JoAnn, like tell us the story of what was done, how the curve was used, and kind of the results at the end of it.
Yeah, I think that's those two slides kind of sum it up. Like there and I will just say it was, speaking to 200 people, collecting. This is the diverge part of the diverge, converge, synthesize. That's that foundational block of innovation. The divergence was, I know these are all brilliant people that have thought about what to do and what they would change if they were allowed to change. And so the last thing I wanted to do was come in and be like, this is what I think we should do. I wanted to hear all of the things they had learned over 15 years of building these things and all the things they would change if we went back to blank sheet of paper. And so that discovery process gave us just so much information to work with. And then people and quotes, and it was all the voices of everyone involved. Um, but how we then synthesized that and identified who were those 12 decision makers, because out of all those hundreds of people, most of them wanted to do what we wanted to do, but they
Hmm.
weren't in the position of power. And so our communications and our business cases, they needed to be designed for those 12 people we identified as the decision makers, the power brokers, or even just the influencers that are in the network that could just plant a negative seed and be like, yeah, that's great, but if it fails, we're in trouble. Like that little seed, you don't want that seed planted because that could
Hmm.
just you could do 5 years of work and then have that tree bloom and you're screwed.
Hmm.
So identifying who all of those people are and then treating them as the individuals they are, that's what the B2Me process allowed us to do. And Dan led that effort.
Yeah, I would like to add that one of the particularly interesting challenges is that the innovation team that you led that sat within the operational arm of the business. So think about that. You're in the middle of this group of people who is probably very resistant to change. Not probably, definitely. They've been spending their entire career, most of them have an engineering background, around building something they know how to build, and they know how to build really, really well. And we're asking them to go back to a blank sheet of paper. Okay, that's not going to go over really, really well. So that's from a psychology standpoint, understanding that they I think it's really important that, as JoAnn said, to establish trust first. And then I think the next thing that needs to happen is understand that JoAnn's team, we care about the things that benefit you and that will help you. And for example, in this case, there just needed to be exponential growth with data centers. And the one thing that really was never addressed, and JoAnn, you can speak to this better than anybody, is this idea of NIMBY, not my backyard.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah. And a little asterisk, they're engineers. They want to solve the problem. They designed the requirements they're given. They have leadership that isn't incentivized to risk. Their leadership is incentivized to deliver with as little risk as possible. So it's systemic. It's not this like Gil, I think, is on the line. Gil and I were traded notes yesterday. Our behavior is very contextual to the environment that we're in. And the systems and the structures of that environment, they give us constraints and opportunities. So
Mhm.
that was to be in an operational org where every day your hair's on fire, you got to keep the thing running 24/7, and the structure of the organization is not built for risk, right? So there's just a lot of variables in play. But the NIMBY, this is ancient, classic infrastructure struggle. No, not in my backyard. I don't want the power plant. I don't want the wastewater plant. I don't want the wind farm. I don't want to see the garbage. I don't want like that is so very much we want our pristine 5 mile radius where everything is beautiful and controlled and the way we want it. The fact that we flip a light switch on, we're just like, hey, I just want it to come on. I don't want to see how it happens, right? So that is a classic problem in big infrastructure, and data centers are massive infrastructure. We're talking about, 300 to 500 acres of land, which is many, many football fields, with a city's worth of power concentrated in them and hundreds of thousands of gallons of water if they're not using closed loop liquid cooling. So there's just this big resource drain. It's a big thing on the horizon. One town was calling it horizon blight. Like that's how they referred to it because they were in Holland and they had tulip fields and then a data center. And so there's just a lot there.
Yeah.
And it was during our synthesis of all of our explorations, we came up with the flip the question. So if the problem is how do we overcome not in my backyard? We flipped it to how do we create please in my backyard? And
Mhm.
just that simple framing from less bad or overcoming a negative to creating a positive that started a snowball of change for us that led to honestly much more exciting back to the curve, much more exciting visions of the future that incorporated all of their expectations, desires, etc. Because now it wasn't a trade-off of, well, it's somewhat less bad, but it's risky. Now it's, holy moly, that's amazing, and then that emotion really overwhelms the the risk for a lot of people. And that's my interpretation of what happened.
Yeah. We got about I have one more question, about 5 minutes answers, because we got some really great questions rolling
Oh,
in.
great.
I'm wondering if you guys can take it, and then I will reveal the outcome of it as well for the audience here who hasn't seen it. But can you guys take us to like a really tactical, practical example of how you use the B2Me curve in your communications, right? We talked about profiles, and there were 12 different profiles, and there were decision levers, but how in your collaborations did that curve come up? How did you talk about it? And specifically, at what points in the process did you use it to guide communications to both, the people living in the data centers and then or living in communities around the data centers and individuals at Microsoft? Just take us down on one specific example.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, so again, JoAnn, you know the people far better than I did, but I'm thinking of a particular individual who is in a position of power. That person will remain unnamed, uh, and this person was, let's just say, not exactly a fan of this kind of change. And a matter of fact, it was the opposite. It was pretty belligerent to the idea. And we knew that that was a stumbling block that we had to get by. If we couldn't get by him, we were in trouble. So the first thing we needed to know was, he needed to know that we understood what his world was before he was even going to get to an emotional place. We needed to show that, okay, we get a data center can't go down. Um, you know, uh, we get that you've got to keep servers up with minimal online resources. You've got to build a bunch of these at a time, and we understand that. And when you show that you understand their world, now their heads are nodding, and they're not expecting that right away. Uh, and when you get to that point, what we did in this case is we were trying to really rack our brains about how are we going to be able to create an emotional connection with someone who's so skeptical. And we really, I remember at that point, our team really insisted on creating a video that would make this tangible for him. Something that would be emotional, really get him to the top of the roller coaster there. And we
Full
basically,
disclosure, my first response was, I don't know if we need a video.
yes, I remember that. It was,
But I'm far enough along with this team that I was like, but I don't know what I don't know, and you guys are pros, so I'm gonna go with this.
yep. So that's what we did. The video in this case was animated, and instead of really focusing on the negative, what we did was we did show the possible impacts that these data centers would have on the environment and communities over time. And that's why we did it in an illustrated way because it felt a little less scary. But we ended really on a very, very positive note, showing what the future could be while creating urgency around it. Because I remember the very emotional end of that film was the only thing we can't create is more time, and the sun goes down. And from what I understand, well, JoAnn, maybe you can describe what happened in that room at that
Oh,
point.
well, a couple things happened. First, so this was an engineer, and he was in a very high position of power. And I had been meeting with him for many months at this point, and he kept asking me for the electrical diagrams behind what we were going to build. I'm like, we haven't designed what we're going to build. We need the money to go design it. So this is the kind of resistance I was meeting. And after all of those months that were very tense and hostile, we sat down with them in a regular update and showed them this video. We're like, look, we're going to lay out our vision for you, but we created this to walk you through the why of what we're trying to achieve. And I think you have the quote on a card. He teared up. Like it was fun. I was blown away. Again, I was skeptical about us needing a video, but I've since come to learn about the combination of music, words, and images and how powerful they are as mechanisms. Um, and this was by the end of that 3-minute video, I think it is, um, that was the response. And he talked about how he wants a positive legacy and he has a daughter and he wants her to be proud of him. And all of these personal, emotional things came out and led to this statement. Um, couldn't have asked for a better result on a video.
And it was helpful because we had done some homework to try to identify some of the psychological characteristics of this gentleman,
Yeah.
and we knew that he was very much a family man, and we anticipated that this might have an effect on him. We didn't realize it would be to the extent that he would be crying at the end of the video.
Not
Uh,
crying. I want
but
to put that out there. But he did a little tear
yeah,
up.
yeah. I'm sorry. That's for a man. That's crying.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that video went on to become the public facing video of cloud ops sustainability. That was the really unexpected thing that marketing and PR got a hold of it and wanted this to be the message that Microsoft put out. That's why we're able to share the video on my LinkedIn and on our website. Like a lot of the visuals and everything that we share, they have to be in the public domain. Um,
And we will make sure to share that as a follow-up so you can watch your version of it as well. It's very impactful. But I think that was a great example of you understood the curve and the journey that, he was one of 12, but then one of 12 we're going to have to go through in order to get a yes to the funding. And so I think it was understanding that we all humans, we meaning humans, every single one of us goes through that journey and understanding like how can you communicate things that are going to resonate both with the emotional part of all of us and with the cognitive part of all of us. And so that was one tactic. We could spend hours talking about all the others and the journey. And I know that Dan and JoAnn would love to unpack it more. But we have a lot of good questions to get to. And I have to show you where we got to. So you remember that vision of the data center and the question of, do you want this in your backyard? All the work with the B2Me curve and everything we just talked about was the process in which JoAnn, Dan, and our teams went through to get the internal team at Microsoft to say yes to investing in what a future could look like. Because there was a lot that was going to go into, figuring out what does a new data center look like? What does a data center have to be for people to say yes to? There was engineering, there was design work, there was experience work, etc. And so once the yes, yeah,
Procurement,
oh yeah,
like legal,
it
environmental.
was massive. But that funding ultimately helped create this vision. And so you see of had the team not understood the psychological barriers or process that a dozen individuals would have to go through, this vision for the data center of the future wouldn't exist. And so,
And
Dan.
I just want to say there's a lot of trees in this. This is far more than trees. We
Mhm.
redesigned every element except for the racks of servers themselves. And that was key to achieving this. And it did take all of those hundreds of people's input and experience and lessons learned. It really was a synthesis of the entire organization. And then we had to build a roadmap to get there. But a lot of people look at the trees, they're like, oh, great, it's a green building. It's like, there's no building. Look,
So just
it's
something else I want to
green, but
mention.
there's no building.
Karen, if you don't mind bringing it up just for one
Yeah,
one
of
second,
course.
I just want to mention something quick, and I know there's some questions, but you'll notice there's a timeline on the left, and you remember the part of the curve where we talk about having a shared vision. Well,
Mhm.
one of the ways to create that shared vision is to show someone tangibly what something can look like step by step. So if you were to click on the initiation of the project button on the left, you would see, basically a barren piece of land. It looks like a parking lot. And 1 month, and you begin to see progress. 2 months, and then eventually, you get to the point where it's 2 years later, and you've got a fully built out. Now, we're not going to say all these trees are going to grow that tall, that fast. That's an expectation setting issue, but you really can create that shared vision just by making it tangible. People have a lot of trouble with abstracts. That's another thing to really be concerned about with when it comes to that journey map.
And we talk about it in the book. We say, you've got to get them excited with the big vision. That's the end state that we all want to run toward. And then you got to go back to the beginning and lay down stepping stones. And then you got to celebrate each time you achieve that stepping stone. You don't keep going back to the big vision. You kind of go there once in a while and say, yeah, we're still on path. But you celebrate, hey, look what we just did. We made the first step. Awesome. Second
Mhm.
step.
Yep,
Awesome.
that's right. Yep, and people see things in shades of gray, so that's how change happens. It's not. Oh, yep, I'm in.
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
gradual process.
Yep.
Awesome. Um, we have four great questions. We'll see how many we can get to. Either way, if we don't get to all of them, we will follow up with Q&A answers via text. So please, please, please keep sending them in if you have more. Um, the first one I will read, and then I'm going to ad lib a little bit and add some color to it and add some of my own questions. So the question, as it was submitted, is where do you see the most significant difference for this process when it's creating an organization versus creating a product?
Mm.
And then the part two I'm going to add to that is, this data center of the future is a massive undertaking. And so it is extremely credible to the process and the success of it. What about scenarios that are maybe smaller, which is almost everything, than the data center of the future? How relatable is this process, whether it's in product organization, and just talk about the varying degrees of kind of transformation and innovation, and if there's differences between organization, product, and scale of the innovation.
Right. So I'll start, Dan, but I want you to really
Yep.
run with it. The fork wasn't met with resistance because they'd never seen a fork before. They had pitchforks they were throwing hay with in the medieval times. The fork was about people and their expectations of how they ate and what dinner was like, and they used their hands and they ripped meat apart. And it doesn't matter if it's a massive technology or a tiny technology. And in fact, 90% of the value you're going to create, or more, or I'm going to say 90%, most of the value you create in innovation comes from all the stuff around the technology, the systems and the pricing and the marketing and all. So it's the same process because people are in that process. That's my big takeaway.
Yep, I agree. It just so happens that my little brother is in human resources for a large company, and he loves the B2B process because there's nothing more difficult than culture change at mass scale when you have 20 or 30,000 employees, or like Microsoft 100,000 or more. How do you make that happen? So he actually has baked that into his practice. And he does it very differently than most organizations do it. And he notices it especially when there's some sort of real organizational shift. Maybe a new company got acquired that really, people are having a hard time fitting. That's where you have to be able to paint that picture for people about what this is going to look like. If you don't say anything, it's a vacuum, and people will fill that vacuum with whatever they want.
We
Awesome.
have
So
just a
if I
shout
was
out to the Insiders group. If you sign up for Microsoft Insiders, totally free, from the book website, the bonus chapter is about the introduction of the hackathon by Satya Nadella and how that was a stepping stone to creating the culture change he wanted to create in Microsoft when he took over as CEO and get everybody thinking like innovators and creators and finding their place in it.
awesome. If I was to paraphrase summarize both of your answers, it would be this process applies whether it's a product innovation or an organizational new company transformation. And it also applies whether it's a data center or a fork.
Yep. Because at the
Nice.
heart of it is people, right?
Exactly.
So, and that's the really interesting thing that blew my mind the many years ago was it's all about people, stupid. Like,
Mhm.
like, and
Mhm.
as an introvert, techie, blah blah blah, I'm like, oh God, people. But it's been very handy to have this in the toolbox.
Yeah, you
Awesome.
can't win an argument with logic and facts. That's, think about it, it's just never going to happen.
Yep. Okay. I am going to reference the curve again for this one. So, the next question is, how can you tell where someone is or a group of people? How can you tell where they are at on this decision curve at a given time?
Well, that's the interesting thing is that you in the case of for example, a website, you really don't know where somebody is, but you need to be able to allow them to find where they're at in a hurry and make it very easy. You have to have that content available for them. Uh, on the other hand, if you do have the benefit of trying to triangulate where somebody is, you may know that they've already been into cognitive country, and what the thing that they're missing now is shared vision. And then you can create that, and that's a huge advantage. But there are times that you may not know it. We do audits for clients sometimes, and we can tell where people fall out of the journey because they don't have enough of a particular type of content. Like the most common ones we see is that they're not able to counter that last minute fear, or they really don't get the emotional connection anywhere close to as high as it needs to be. Those are the two big areas. Most organizations have plenty of the cognitive stuff at the bottom. But
Yeah.
great, it's a great question.
Yeah. I would say the way I've learned to do it is Um, there's the technical way I do it, which is sentiment analysis, looking at the words people are using, whether they're adopting our language and sharing the co-created language. We talk a lot about language in the book and how important it is to establish words everybody understands together. Um, but then I also look at who's showing up, who's responding to my outreach, who's looking, I remember getting on a call with one senior leader and then being like, oh, I'm so excited. It's JoAnn time. Okay, I got that one. Versus somebody showing up 5, 10, 15 minutes late and then not even giving a reason why, right? Like, because there's all kinds of reasons why they could be late, but if it's just they're just not really keen to show up, I still got emotional work I got to do. So it's more about observation and really listening intently and watching intently of those people around you and getting better at the observation.
Yeah. I'd also add to that, it's focusing on the questions that they ask. So I think one important thing to remember is everybody starts at the far left of this curve. So the people who you're collaborating with, you may have been collaborating with them for longer, right? So they saw the idea first and went through that emotional connection with you. So they may be farther along, but everybody goes through this. So with the first time is you kind of, if you were to map all your stakeholders of people who you need to support the idea, move the idea over, adopt the idea. You can kind of map when the idea was introduced and then kind of think back to their own personal journey of where were they when they first heard about this idea? How was it presented to them? Did they get that high emotional connection or was it kind of a blip in the radar and they went straight into cognitive country? And then you can really tell some of that observation of if people are adding on to when you're sharing a vision about how it excites them and their own ideas, they're at that high emotional connection or even that kind of shared vision stage. But if they're asking questions about what's the ROI on this, what is it going to take to really um, to really get this over the finish line. How do I prove this? What could hang us up? Right? They're in that cognitive country, right? And Dan, I really want to go back to something you said at the start of this call. The goal is to get that curve, that first emotional connection curve, as high as you possibly can, because in theory, everything that happens after that kind of diminishes that curve. And so your goal is at the end of this whole journey that yes hump, right, isn't diminished enough from the emotional side. So I'd say key in on the questions that people are asking as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think we got time for one more. It's hard to multitask and look at questions and have a screen share. So give me 1 second. Okay. Um, So this is a great one. What is the right balance between listening deeply and sharing your innovation so that people feel both understood and emotionally connected to your idea? So the balance between listening and sharing and convincing, you kind of have to go through a process.
Oh, that's a great question. My first thought, saying it ugly, is that it's more art than science, but Dan may just say that I'm totally wrong. It's totally science. Um, I know that I am much better at one, I don't try to convince anymore. I'm far enough in my career, and you all know this because we just went through some conversations with people that I'm like, that there's no there in this relationship. That I don't try to convince. I put it out there and I try to connect and I try to reflect and I try to stand side by side. If I feel like we're partners in it, then we're go. And if I don't feel that partnership, either because they're not there or I'm not there, then I've learned in my career that my time and energy is spent better elsewhere. But I know not everybody has that option to opt out, but I do, you can temper your own expectations of what's possible to be done.
I think this is also where, in the case of a conversation with somebody, if that's what it is, very, very active listening will really tell you exactly where somebody is. Because you can tell if they haven't made that emotional connection, if they're sort of dwelling on on kind of in your mind, the wrong stuff. In their mind, it's not wrong. It's what they think. And that's where you would spend the balance of your time. And to me, I would reframe the goal too. The goal is not to get that person all the way through this journey in that conversation. The goal is to get them to the next step of where they need to be in that journey. Let it sit, and then come back to it and revisit.
Yeah, one more little tidbit from the book and from another book I love, Primal Intelligence, and another book I love, stretch. People step and they stretch. Almost nobody is a cliff diving leaper. Those people are a special subset of people. So just try to help people step forward and stretch into the future, but don't expect them to just jump over a chasm.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. We have a handful of questions that we will respond via email along with the video as well. And thank you to all attending. One last 30-second mention is we want to give you a little bit of a sneak peek of what next month's session is going to cover. So you can look out for that. So JoAnn, maybe give us a 30-second teaser and then we can let everybody go and end on time.
Yeah, super excited to have my co-author, Dean Carrigan, join us. After we released the book, he moved out of Microsoft Research into Microsoft Core AI, and he is now tasked with helping 5,000 Microsoft engineers transition to being AI first. So he is
No small feat.
learning a ton about how to navigate this change.
Awesome. So that will be the topic. And to Dan and JoAnn, thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you. It's
Taryn.
fun.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.